All right, let's jump into another deep dive. This time, we're going way back in time to archaic Italy, even before the Roman Empire, as most people think of it.
Fascinating period.
It really is. We're diving into this academic paper. It's called Some Remarks on War Rituals in Archaic Italy and Rome.
Oh, yeah.
To see how war and violence wasn't just a Roman thing, it was something experienced by all the different communities in the region.
Yeah. And it really makes you question some assumptions about Rome. Like, was it really uniquely violent or just a product of its time and place?
Right. Like, was Rome always destined to be this huge empire, or is there something else going on?
Yeah.
And our source today is saying that warfare was really tied to religion for all these groups, right?
Absolutely. And you can even see it in the archaeology.
Oh, wow. Okay.
When you look at the early Iron Age in Latium, there's a clear shift in how people were living, like where they chose to build their settlements.
So what kind of shift are we talking about? Like, what's changing?
Well, instead of these open settlements, people start moving to more defensible spots.
Yeah.
Hilltops and stuff. And they're building walls like crazy, which really says something about how much conflict was happening.
Yeah, that sounds like they were living in a pretty volatile environment.
Totally. This wasn't just a few little fights here and there. This was like constant threat of violence.
Yeah, you're always looking over your shoulder.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a good chance that you had new groups migrating into the area too. So that just adds to the tension, more clashes.
Okay, so right from the start, these communities are having to fight to survive.
Yeah.
Wow. That makes this connection between war and religion even more interesting,
Totally.
Because it wasn't just conquering to get more land. It was like tied into their beliefs about surviving.
Right. For the Romans and the other Italic people, they believed that the gods actually fought alongside them.
Whoa.
Influenced battles.
Yeah.
So keeping those gods happy, that was essential.
Yeah, like you don't want to get on the bad side of a god, especially if they control whether you win or lose a war.
No kidding.
I can see how that leads to some pretty intense rituals.
Yeah.
What were some of the things they did, to make sure the gods were on their side?
Well, one big one was the idea of pax dierum.
Pax dierum.
Yeah, which basically means maintaining peace with the gods.
Keeping the gods happy.
Yeah, exactly. Because they believed, if the gods were angry or unhappy, it would directly affect how they did on the battlefield.
You wasn't enough to have a strong army.
Yep.
You needed that divine backing.
100%.
Yeah.
And to make sure they had that backing, they came up with this idea of bellum iustum.
Bellum iustum.
A just war. They had specific rituals to figure out, okay, is this war morally justifiable?
Oh.
They're like, do the gods approve?
Because they weren't just like going around conquering everyone they saw. They actually thought they needed like permission from the gods.
Yeah, divine approval.
Huh. Wow.
And the rituals for bellum iustum, pretty elaborate.
I bet. But it's really those more intense rituals, right, that really show how connected war and religion were.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, so what's an example? Like, give me the intense stuff.
All right, well, how about devotio?
Devotio.
This is a ritual, okay, where a Roman general would basically sacrifice himself to the gods.
Wait, hold on. Sacrifice himself, like he'd actually die.
Yeah, to win the battle.
That's hardcore.
It's intense.
Yeah.
You have to think, what would that have done to the Roman troops? Seeing their leader willing to give up their life,
Yeah, that's like next level commitment.
Huge display of authority backed by the power of the gods.
Whoa. Do we have any stories, like any specific examples of this devotio thing actually happening?
Oh yeah, definitely. One of the most famous is the story of Publius Decius Mus.
Okay.
At the Battle of Centenum. It was 295 BCE.
Okay.
The Romans were fighting against this group, the Samnites, and also the Gauls. And it was, a tough battle.
Things are getting dicey.
Yeah, exactly. So Decius Mus, he sees his troops, they're starting to falter, lose their courage.
Oh no.
And he decides, all right, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do the devotio ritual.
Wow.
He calls on the gods, dedicates himself as a sacrifice, and then charges like straight into the enemy lines.
Wow, wow, what a way to go out.
Right. I can't imagine that level of courage.
Me neither.
But it's not just about courage though. Think about the message it sends to everyone else.
Yeah.
This wasn't just any military leader. This was a figure with like religious significance.
Yeah.
Willing to die for Rome. Like it was the will of the gods.
It's almost like like a martyr, you know.
Exactly. And his sacrifice, it had a huge impact. The Roman troops, they were inspired.
They're like, we got to win this now.
Totally. And they fought like crazy, and they ended up winning a decisive victory.
Wow, that's amazing. So this ritual, as crazy as it sounds to us, you know, it was strategic.
It was.
Like a way to pump up the troops and help them win.
It really shows how intertwined religion and warfare were, you know? Like, devotio wasn't the only ritual where they were trying to use the divine to their advantage.
Oh, okay, so what else?
What else had this thing called evocatio?
Evocatio.
Yeah.
What was that?
It was basically like trying to get the enemy's gods to switch sides.
What?
Yeah.
Whoa.
So they would try to call upon, like, invoke the enemy's gods, and then promise them, you know, better treatment if they came over to the Roman side.
Oh, wow. So it was like spiritual warfare?
It was.
They're playing mind games with the gods.
And then you have Vera Sacrum.
Vera Sacrum.
Yeah. This means like sacred spring.
Okay.
So they would dedicate everything born during the springtime to the gods. Sometimes those who were dedicated, they would actually have to leave the community when they got older.
Wow. So this wasn't just about battles, huh? This was affecting their whole lives, right? Like birth, warfare, everything. It's like their whole world was built around this interaction with the divine.
It really was.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets even more interesting. These rituals, they weren't just a Roman thing.
Oh, really?
A lot of other Italic tribes did similar things.
Really? So Rome wasn't alone in having these kind of intense war rituals?
Not at all. Lots of their neighbors were doing the same kind of stuff, like the Lex Sacrata. It's Latin for sacred oath.
Okay.
Groups like the Samnites, Etruscans, even the Ligures, they all used these oaths to kind of bind their warriors together.
So even their rivals were calling on the gods, swearing these sacred oaths.
Yeah, but
Wow, it's like they were all speaking the same language, even if they were fighting. This wasn't just about like who could swing a sword better. It was this whole shared understanding of how war fit into their world.
and that shared understanding, it tells us something about how they saw the world. You know, conflict, that wasn't some weird, awful thing. It was just a normal part of life, expected even.
It makes you wonder, right? Like, was Rome really that much more violent?
Exactly.
Or were they just like part of this bigger, more violent world?
Right. It's all about context.
And that context, that helps us understand how Rome eventually rose to power.
Right. Which is something we'll talk about in the next part of our deep dive.
It really is amazing to think about how these war rituals, like, shaped the whole culture of archaic Italy. You know, it wasn't just about like who had the most land. It was about this world where like the gods were a part of everything.
Totally. And it's important to remember, right, that we can't look at the violence back then the same way we do now.
Right.
Their whole way of seeing the world, it was different.
We can't just call them like warlike without understanding what they believed.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They thought they were playing by a certain set of rules.
Yeah.
You know, like a cosmic order.
Okay.
And it was all dictated by the gods. So war, for them, it was about keeping things balanced with the divine, not just, you know, winning for the sake of it.
It makes you think, right? That we really need to try to understand their perspective.
Yeah.
Like, what were their motivations? How did their beliefs lead to these actions?
For sure. And religion played a huge role in how they controlled and justified war. Take Bellemistum, for example.
Okay.
That concept, that made sure war wasn't taken lightly. It had to be, you know, just in the eyes of the gods.
So it wasn't just about having a bigger army or a better strategy. You had to believe that the gods were on your side.
Yeah, like they had this divine checklist before they even went to war.
Yeah.
Did we consult the oracles? Did we do the right rituals? Did we make the gods happy? It was like spiritual prep, not just military strategy.
Wow. And that attention to ritual, it wasn't just before the war started, right?
Nope.
It was throughout the whole thing.
Every part of the conflict was shaped by these rituals, from gathering the troops to like what happened to the losers. Think about the Roman triumph.
The triumph, those parades, celebrating the victories. Those are so cool.
This is way more than just a celebration, though. It was like a super organized religious thing, you know, to honor the gods, thank them for helping the general. He wasn't just a military leader at that point. He was almost like a god himself.
It was like showing off the victory to the gods, too, not just the people.
Exactly. And remember how a lot of these rituals were shared by different Italic tribes?
Yeah, yeah.
So even when they were fighting each other, there was this shared understanding of the role the gods played.
Like they were all reading from the same playbook, even when they were enemies. But if everyone's following these same rituals, how did Rome end up on top? Like, were they just better at it somehow?
That's where it gets interesting. Because they might have shared similar beliefs and rituals, but they used them differently, They adapted to change.
They're flexible.
Yeah, and a good example of that. Let's go back to the Roman triumph. Remember, we said it might have come from the Etruscans.
Yeah.
But the Romans, they took that tradition and turned it into something else entirely. They made it a tool for politics.
Like propaganda.
Exactly. It became this super elaborate show meant to highlight Roman power, not just celebrating the win, but controlling how people saw it, projecting this image of strength.
Oh, I can see how that would work. The general, all decked out like a god, showing off the treasure and the defeated enemies. That's a powerful image.
Carefully crafted, too.
Yeah.
The message was clear. We're powerful, we win, and the gods are on our side. It wasn't just a party. It was a statement.
Wow, they weren't just winning battles, they were winning over people's minds, too. They knew how to use symbolism, spectacle.
Oh, yeah. They were really good at using their beliefs to get what they wanted, blending the spiritual with the political to make their authority stronger.
So maybe Rome's rise wasn't just about military strength, right?
Right.
Maybe it was about creating this idea that they were destined to rule, that they were special.
And as they got stronger, they could push that idea even more, present themselves as the rightful rulers of Italy.
Destined for greatness.
Right.
But all these rituals, how did they impact the average Roman? Seeing these displays of power, did that affect how they saw themselves?
That's a great question. And it's something we'll get into in our next segment. But it's safe to say those rituals had a big impact on Roman society as a whole. They helped create this sense of unity, of shared purpose,
Okay.
which would become super important as they continue to expand.
It's wild to think that these rituals, some of them, pretty brutal, they actually helped build Roman society.
Yeah, and we have to remember that Rome wasn't this unified culture from the beginning. It was all these different groups, right?
Yeah.
With different beliefs, different backgrounds, and they all had to come together somehow under this idea of Roman power.
So these rituals, they helped create that sense of unity. Like they all belong to something bigger.
In a way, yeah. The rituals, they were this powerful force bringing people together, a shared experience, No matter where you came from, you could be part of something.
It's kind of interesting how something like war, which seems so destructive, could actually make people feel closer.
It does seem kind of strange, right?
Yeah.
But that's how powerful ritual can be. It can totally change how you see the world, your place in it, how you relate to other people. So the Romans, no matter their background, they're all doing these rituals together, seeing these crazy displays of power. It bound them together, it gave them a shared purpose.
So it wasn't just about keeping the gods happy or conquering new land. It was about building an identity.
Right, we are Roman.
Yeah, exactly. And that belief, that Roman identity, that made them want to expand even more. It wasn't just surviving anymore. It was like this mission, given to them by the gods to bring Roman order to everyone.
It's a powerful idea, right? To be chosen by the gods, destined for greatness.
Yeah, and the Romans, they were really good at using that idea to get people on their side.
For sure. And the rituals themselves, they weren't set in stone.
Right.
They changed over time to fit what Roman society needed, what the empire needed.
What about the triumph?
Oh yeah, the triumph.
Yeah.
As Rome got more powerful, the triumph got bigger and fancier.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't just a religious thing anymore. It was this huge spectacle meant to impress people, even scare them a little, show everyone how dominant Rome was.
So they were always trying to one-up themselves with bigger and better rituals.
Yeah. It's you win a battle, you have a huge celebration that makes you even more powerful.
Yeah, to cycle. Right. Victory, then rituals, then more power. So Rome's success wasn't just about brute force. It was also about being smart, being adaptable.
Exactly. They took these old traditions and they made them work for their goals. They weren't afraid to borrow from other cultures either.
Yeah.
As they expanded. So they had this mix of old and new, this constantly changing set of rituals that showed off their power.
It's like they were always adding new stuff to the mix, keeping it interesting. They knew to make the rituals work, they had to mean something to people.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the big things we can take away from this whole deep dive. War. It's never just about military stuff. It's always connected to what people believe, their culture, how their society works. It's about shaping how people think, justifying what you do.
And creating that sense of purpose, like we were talking about.
For sure.
We've gone over a lot in this deep dive, haven't we? Intense rituals like devotio, that amazing spectacle of the Roman triumph. It's really incredible to see how all these rituals, they seem so weird to us now, but they were so important to the Romans. They built their identity, paved the way for them to become this huge power.
Yeah. And even though these specific rituals are from so long ago, the ideas behind them, they're still relevant. How religion and war are connected, how ritual shapes who we are, how we justify our actions, and how cultures change and adapt during conflict.
Absolutely. So, as we wrap up, this is the thought I'm left with. We saw how these rituals helped Rome rise to power. But what happened when they ran into cultures that didn't do those rituals? Did those rituals end up holding Rome back in the long run? Something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.